Thank you so much, Professor Haas. We have a few minutes for some questions from the crowd, and I think we should start with an easy one. What are your thoughts on the Danish migration policies?
Oh, I'm from the Netherlands, and we just have a new government supported by the far right-wing party by Geert Wilders, and they often take Denmark as an example. Denmark knows how to stop refugees coming. What I actually found interesting, I know that Denmark has an opt-out from lots of European regulations on refugees, and the Netherlands would like to have that. In retrospect, we're not going to get it. What I found surprising, I looked up Danish immigration figures. Denmark has rather high immigration, actually. It is a myth that Denmark has very low immigration. It has not that many refugees, certainly the last few years, apart from Ukrainians. But in general, I think Denmark proves the point that a society that's very wealthy is going to attract migrants almost inevitably. And as far as I understand, particularly from Eastern Europe, a lot of migrants are actually have been coming to Denmark, but also many high-skilled migrants. So, well, I think it is one of those, the main issue, I think, with asylum in Europe, and didn't have the time to elaborate on that, is responsibility sharing. I think we use that word burden sharing. I think it's already the wrong starting point. We see a systematic lack of solidarity within Europe. What people don't realize, for instance, if they say in the Netherlands, oh, Orban knows how to stop asylum. I say, well, Orban just doesn't take his share of the responsibility. It means more people come to another country. When Denmark made its asylum policy more restrictive, it didn't lead to an overall decrease of asylum seekers to Europe. Basically, Denmark threw it over the fence to other European countries. It's a great example of how something may look like a success for one country, but actually on the larger scheme of things doesn't solve any problem.
For the next question, what does science say about the impact of immigration for host countries? Does it lean good or bad?
Who says Sen?
About the impacts of immigration for the host country.
That's a very long story. I mean, whether you talk about culture or social, economic, I think one thing I can say is the following, and that makes it understand why I think the pro-migration camp often has it wrong as well. That if you look at the economic impacts of migration, it is clear that immigration doesn't drive down wages or that migrants take away jobs. But if you look at who benefits from migration economically, it's particularly the better off that benefit from immigration, because they are the ones using the services of migrants or even owning the companies that can make higher profits because of migrants coming. But lower income earners don't benefit from migration, or not at all, or may even lose out a little bit. But that also includes a lot of former migrants. So what it means is that the economic benefits of migration are not equally distributed. And if you look at the social impacts, because migration can come with problems with segregation, and particularly when governments don't encourage migrants to become part of society, it's predominantly those people who don't benefit from migration economically who are most directly confronted with social consequences of migration. That, by the way, explains why I call this a drawbridge phenomenon, that a lot of former migrants turn against immigration. So we have to understand that migration has different impacts for different groups in society.
Does migration from a region encourage more migration from that region?
Yes. We know that for refugees, for instance, there are two main determinants of refugee migration. Level of conflict, I mean, that's very easy to understand. And the second point is that refugees tend to go to those countries where they already have family members living. And that's true for almost any form of migration. It's a sort of path dependency in the process. So definitely, if there's already a community in a particular destination, it attracts more migrants from the same origin. This is why we, for instance, see that many migrants from Francophone Africa tend to go to Francophone countries, and from Anglophone countries tend to go to English-speaking countries. Yeah.
Did the distribution of gender and age of migrants change over time?
Many people say that migration has become more and more feminine, that more and more migrants are women, but actually the data doesn't show that. And that itself may be part of a masculine perspective. Also in the past, many women migrated as workers, actually, or as dependents. So you cannot really say there's been a big change in that sense, although there may be more women than ever who migrate independently as workers, even more than before. And that has to do with the changing structure of labor demand. Because in the past, it was predominantly, of course, in industries and mines, jobs that tended to attract male workers. But these days, more and more job shortages are in the services. If you think about care work, for instance, domestic work, and this attracts more and more female migrants. So we could say there's more and more independent female migrant workers than there used to be, perhaps. Yeah.
We stereotypically hear that immigration is linked with criminal activity. Is this accurate?
The interesting thing is that the evidence actually shows that migrants are less criminal than non-migrants. Yeah, it's true. It's true for the United States. It's true for European countries. The evidence that we do have. The issue, though, is that criminality can become an issue when you look at second generation. It has to do with segregation. It has to do with unemployment, long-term problems, but it has nothing to do with migration itself. And if you look at the main determinant for criminal behavior is socioeconomic exclusion. We know that. And it has nothing to do with somebody's ethnic background. But immigrants generally are less criminal. Why? Because immigrants tend to be quite exceptional people, a sub-selection of countries of origin, not the most desperate, poorest people. They tend to be the more ambitious people who want to take risks. And they tend to be quite law-abiding, traditional and religious, and stick to their communities and high levels of social control. And that is a sociological explanation why migrants tend to be less criminal than non-migrants.
Fascinating. Are the deaths in migration routes becoming significantly more and more in recent years?
The what?
Are the deaths in migration routes at all significant compared to total number of migration?
Well, it goes up and down more. It's not a linear increase, but you could definitely say that compared to the 1990s, 2000s, the death rates have gone up. Partly has to do with these longer routes. So if you cross the Strait of Gibraltar, obviously the risks are way lower than if you cross all the way from Senegal to the Canary Islands. So yeah, it has become more risky. But it's actually a result of the policy. So the idea that even more smuggling crackdowns will solve the issue actually only increases the dangers. So in a way, it's part of the policy. The policy has created this problem.
I'm afraid we have a couple of minutes left, so maybe we finish on this question we got a few times now. What are your recommendations on immigration policy?
Okay. That partly has to do with, it's a good question, and 2 minutes, right? It partly has to do with what kind of society you want to live in, and this is how I finish my book. And I think care is a good example. Do we really want to outsource all kind of work we no longer want to do to a sort of new underclass of migrant workers? I'm quite critical towards that. So there's a very corporate side to this idea that we need more migrant workers to do all the jobs we don't want to do. Do we really want to create, like I said, a new underclass of people who are excluded from society, who are being exploited? And that, I think, is the problem. We risk to repeat the guest worker illusion, that we want workers. There is this famous quote from the Swiss writer Max Frisch, who said in 1967, I think, he said, we wanted workers, we got people instead. So as long as we only consider, we basically look the other way. You look at the enforcement statistics, right? Even if migrants are not legally here, we largely tolerate their work. We basically tolerate their exploitation, and we look the other way. And I think that is dangerous. A real migration policy is honest. That is connected to a real debate. Who's going to take care of our elderly, of our sick, and our kids in the future? A very important question in an aging sort of Europe and aging West. Is this going to be migrant workers? Do we need to educate more of our own people? Is it a combination of that? But you cannot divorce these debates from... So you cannot just have a migration debate without talking about the kind of society you want to live in. And I think if the policies are not connected, you get all these problems. So I think we really need to align migration policy with the way we envisage our future, do we really want to maximize growth in the future if we think about environmental problems? These are much bigger debates. And the pro-migration agenda is also very much driven by sort of corporate interest that want to maximize growth, maximize immigration. I think you can have a critical debate on that. So I didn't give you a real answer.
On that note, please give it up for Professor Haas for an amazing talk. And thank you so much for attending on this Monday.
Thank you
So much.